Hey guys, Coach Logan here again, reviewing our game of the week from the online tournaments. This was Bobby Q playing white versus Noah G playing black. So I'm just going to jump right in. We had e4 from Bobby. E6 is Noah's favorite line, the French defense. D4, D5. This is all pretty standard. Knight C3 I think is the move of choice of the top players these days. It just prevents any c5 stuff from black, basically. If black were to play c5, white just takes, and black has issues with this pawn. For instance, takes, queen takes, white is up a pawn. So knight c3 is a great choice. We get knight f6 from black, the Steinitz variation, threatening the e4 pawn. Pawn to e5, knight to d7, and now f4 from Bobby. Again, this is the choice of all the top players. This just supports the e5 pawn because we know in a French the next thing black will do is play c5, challenging our d4 pawn. And we want e5 to be defended. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3, all mainline moves. Bishop e7 from Noah. And here Bobby plays bishop to e2, which is certainly not a bad move. I mean, it's just clearly a natural developing move. My personal choice is to play queen d2. I tend to think that the plans where you castle queenside are more ambitious. So, for instance, just one fun line here. I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly because I want to get through the rest of the game. If black were to castle, I actually don't think white should castle right away. If white were to castle right here, then after pawn c4, black's attack is actually going to be pretty strong. b5 and b4 will come soon, and black's attack might actually come a little bit fast here for white's taste. So I think after castles, white should grab the pawn on c5, knight recaptures, and now castle, now that there's no c4. b6 is one of black's main choices, a6 is the other one. And there's a fun line here that goes queen to g1 with the idea of heading over to g3 and causing some problems for black's king. Bishop b7, and now just throwing f5, just going right for their king. f5. Black doesn't want to take because there'd be issues with the d5 pawn, so after something like queen c7 threatening e5, white does slide his queen to g3, which is a great attacking square in a lot of lines, like in, for instance, in the Italian, white sometimes brings his queen here, and the Sicilian, it's just a good attacking square. Knight to e4, and so white chops, and then plays f6 with the threat of mate in 1, amazingly. So bishop takes f6 from black, who's using this clever pin along the diagonal, so if takes, black emerges fine from all that. Instead, white plays the amazing move here, rook to d7, which is a decoy of the black queen. And now after captures, white can take with the threat of mate, which is not as easy to deal with as it looks. g6 is necessary, but now queen h4, and the queen is headed right for h6 and g7. Black does not have a dark square bishop. So they have to come up with the move queen d8, so that if now we were to do this, they could take the pawn. But white, once again, goes for a clever deflection, just ignores his hanging knight and plays bishop c4. And after takes, we get rook to d1, once again deflecting the black queen. We get a chop on d1 because it's black can't play a move like queen c7. It just allows queen h6, game over in a move. So he has to give the queen. And we get this materially unbalanced position where white has an extra queen, but black has two rooks for it and some extra pawns, but white does have mating threats. Black needs to play something like king h8 so that rook g8 can defend. Very interesting position. This is the kind of stuff you get in that variation of the Steinitz. I think bishop e2 is just quieter, not worse, just quieter. So we get c takes d4. I think black should have just castled, but I don't want to make this basically just a video where I go through a bunch of opening lines, so I'm going to just play through these moves. Knight takes, castles, castles. And here's another spot where I feel like I didn't really love black's decision. Black played knight to c5 here. I think Noah correctly realized that this knight is sort of a problem piece right now. But I think the way to actually improve that knight, as weird as this looks, is to go knight to b8 and then just head to c6, which is a much better square. That sort of knight maneuvering is not all that uncommon in structures like this. c6 is a much better square. It would bother white's bishop after like queen d2. White has to spend a tempo on this bishop. Bishop d7. Yeah, I probably prefer white here, but it's definitely a game. It's a typical kind of French stuff. So instead we get knight c5, but here I just don't think the knight is actually that great. It's sort of superficially active, but I'm not actually sure what it's doing. So then bishop f3 from white. Just putting this bishop on a decent diagonal here. Sorry about that. Okay. Bishop f3. We get bishop d7, queen to e2, knight to a4. So Noah decides to try to chop the knight, which is not a bad idea. I mean, if you have less space, then trading pieces is generally beneficial. But now Bobby starts to make good use of this bishop with the next couple of moves. Rook to c1. His idea is to play pawn to c4 and just rip open this diagonal, which is a very good plan. So he plays... Black plays a6, and here white plays queen e3, because I think they were a little bit worried that if he plays c4 here, there might be some issues with bishop b5 at some point. So he plays queen e3, rook to c8, and now c4, ripping open the diagonal. Black plays bishop to c6, which is not my favorite solution. I think this is sort of like a kind of one-dimensionally reactive solution. I think we needed to look for activity for black here. So I think that black should have actually grabbed this pawn with the rook and allowed white's bishop this activity on the diagonal. As sort of scary as this looks, because it's even in pawns, but black has these split pawns, and it seems like white's just going to be winning them. But I think black can actually go for activity now with queen to d7. White does have some loose pieces, and if white tries to go pawn grabbing further, after queen c6, okay, threatening this bishop almost appears to be trapped. White has this tactical resource, bishop takes c4, with the point being that if queen takes c4, he has b3, and he should remain up a pawn after he recaptures his piece. But black actually has a much stronger move. Black has a much stronger move after bishop takes c4. Black can play rook to d8. Again, just abusing white's loose pieces, this bishop on c4 and the rook and bishop on d4. If white were to now play something like b3, black has a tactic. You can pause if you want to try to solve it, but I'm going to continue. Black can just grab this bishop, and white can't recapture because of bishop to c5, just winning everything. So after this, white would have to move the bishop. Now black can take, and after something like b3, white is temporarily up 2 pawns, but they're doubled and isolated, and after rook to d2, it's pretty clear that black's activity along the second rank is good compensation for the pawns. White's probably has to play something like queen f3 now to not get mated, and black immediately wins back one of them, probably both of them, and is at least equal. So okay, so that's like hard to find. I mean, it's a lot to calculate, and it's more of a feel. But I just think black needed an active solution here. I think bishop to c6 is just passive, and it's going to lead to a bad endgame, which is what happens soon. Bishop b6, okay, bothering the queen. We get rook to d1. Bishop to e7, angling for a trade, bishop to c5, and white eventually does trade, but he does so without, if he were to take on d8 the move ago, take here, then black would have activated his rook. By taking on e7, white just has good pressure on the file because black is not defending it, and white ends up just simplifying into an endgame where he's just up a pawn. I mean, really here, white is just up a pawn for nothing. So white should be winning this, but let's see what happens. I mean, chess is a game of a lot of would have, could have, should have. So let's see what happens. Queen to e6, rook c to d1. Black plays rook to c2. Bobby here played queen to b3. I actually think the strongest move is just rook to d8, and I think black is going to have some problems on the back rank. For instance, if he is bold enough to go pawn grabbing here, just take, and then queen to d3 is a nasty fork of the rook, and queen to d8, checkmate. Rook to c8 doesn't work. There's a mating tactic. You can pause your videos if you want to try to find it, but in the interest of time, I'm going to continue. Queen d6 check. If king runs to safety, then this is just mate. Mate in 2 moves. If king to e8, then we just go queen d7 check, and then take, and it's over. So instead, I liked rook to d8 there. Bobby played queen b3. He's still winning. But after queen to c6, we see h3, and then queen g6 threatening the g2 pawn. And here's where I think that he starts to lose the thread a bit. I think that when I'm ahead in material, and there's not really compensation, the biggest thing I want to do is just simplify. I just want to make sure my king is safe, I'm fully developed, and I start getting pieces off the board. And Bobby here plays rook 1 to d2, which is certainly objectively not a bad move, but I just think that like the human move here is rook 5 to d2 because this keeps the back rank covered as well and sort of just forces black's rook back out of there and should leave white with a comfortable winning advantage. Rook 1 to d2, black plays rook to c1 check, and now, okay, white probably could come back with the rook, but plays king to h2, and we get queen to b1, and now we sort of see some of the issues with black just invading the back rank here with stuff like rook h1 coming. We get queen takes b7, which again I think is going in the direction of greed rather than simplification. To me, I would just play queen d3, centralize the queen, give yourself the option of rook to d1 at any moment, and queen takes a2 can again be met with back rank stuff, rook to d8, and black is going to have serious problems with rook takes f8 and queen takes. And if they try something like g6. I think here something like queen to d6, and you're threatening f8. If they take, yeah, this should just be winning for white. Queen f6 check. If the king goes back, it's mate with rook to d8, and if the king ventures out, I can't imagine that black's king is going to be too happy here. The computer wants queen h8 in all of its infinite wisdom, not queen takes f7. But I'm going to continue with the main line. Okay, so we had h3, queen g6, okay, black invaded, queen takes b7, and now rook check, flushing out the king. King to g3, queen to e1 check, rook to f2, queen to e3 check, rook f3, queen to e1 check. I think black is happy here with a perpetual because... a repetition because they're down 2 pawns, so why not? White plays king g4, which is certainly bold, and here Noah just goes after this g2 pawn, which is a pretty nice way to keep the attack alive, just attacking a weak pawn. We get rook g3 and now queen e2 check. There was actually an amazing tactic here, which I'm just going to show quickly. Pawn to h5 is actually really something, because if the king takes the pawn, we take the rook. But if something like king h4, now another amazing sequence of moves, pawn to g5, check. Amazingly, there's 3 pieces that could take the pawn, but none of them work. Well, the rook can't take the pawn because of the pin. The king can't take the pawn because queen takes g3. And so if the pawn takes, that now opens up the 4th rank for queen e4 check. King takes on h5. Again, they can't block because the pawn will just capture, amidst other problems with it too. So if king takes h5, now another amazing tactic, queen h7 check, king to g8, and now this basically set up a sideways discovered attack. f5 check just picks up the queen, amazingly. Chess is a bizarre game. But h5 is like a hard, it's sort of a natural sort of keep the attack alive move, but it's hard to see all the variations quickly in time trouble. Instead, we had queen e2 check, which is also a natural move, king f5, g6 check, king to f6. That king is feeling very adventurous there. Queen f2 hitting the rook, and here, amazingly, I think if Bobby were to play rook g4, he's actually winning because the rook defends the f4 pawn, and there's an amazing threat of rook to d8. This rook on g4 is really a star here, just defending both the f4 pawn and any queen h4 checks. And for instance, if black were to play something like rook takes g2, amazingly there's this move rook to d8, which I had highlighted before, and the point is you're just threatening to take on f8 and then play queen takes f7. And if rook takes d8, then just queen takes f7, followed by queen g7 is checkmate. Amazingly, using your king as an active piece in a late middle game. Instead, Bobby played rook f3. Again, they were both in time trouble at this point, so it's hard to really criticize, but this leads to checkmate in one move, actually, so see if you can spot it. All right, I'm going to continue. Noah found it, queen to h4, and that's a pretty nice checkmate, actually, using the 4 different pieces, basically, the 2 pawns, the king, and the queen, and actually also one of White's pieces, this pawn on e5. White's king is actually checkmated. So good job to the players involved. A very interesting kind of back and forth game. I did think White was winning, but as I always say, when you're winning, especially winning material, prioritize simplification. And yeah, good job to the players involved. I will see you guys in my next video.